Hey, welcome to Deprogram. We are unraveling propaganda one story at a time. I'm Michelle Witte. I'm here with Ted Rall and John Kiriakou. Hi, guys.
Hey. Hello. Good to be back.
We have a lot.
Yeah,
too much to talk about. I have
There are things.
Too many things in my notes in front of me. But I know we want to talk about what's been happening in Syria over the last week, where we are today. We definitely are going to talk about the ongoing media hand-wringing of trying to figure out why so many people are so excited that somebody shot the CEO of UnitedHealth in the street. There are a lot of interesting theories abounding as to why on earth anyone would celebrate such an act. So we will talk about that. Maybe you guys want to hear, I took a look at the National Defense Authorization Act to see what was in it after Ryan Grimm of DropSite pointed out that there was language in it that would require the government not to use figures from Gaza's Ministry of Health to calculate casualties. So I looked through to see what other tidbits there were in there. We can get into that a little bit if we want to. And yeah, I guess we'll see what we have time for the rest of it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I will say very quickly, only because we probably don't need to expand on it, but after the Greek press had reported repeatedly that Representative Gus Bilirakis of Florida, known as the Trump Whisperer, would be named ambassador to Greece, which the Greeks said would be the greatest ambassadorial appointment in the history of U.S.-Greek relations. President-elect Trump instead named Kimberly Guilfoyle as ambassador to Greece.
Yes.
Only because, and I get this from a member of the national delegate to the Republican National Committee, because she caught Don Jr. cheating on her a couple of weeks ago. He broke up with her, and they decided to exile her so that she's not a problem for the family. And so they gave her Greece.
God.
So
hey, did you see
there
are worse assignments.
Yeah, no, for sure.
She
Carrie
could have
Lake
been
is
sent to
apparently going to be ambassador to Mexico.
You've got to be kidding me.
That's what I just saw. I mean, going to be, it's not a done deal yet, but yeah, I would say notably worse. Not to suggest that Greece is low on our priority list, John, but it seems like the relationship with Mexico is a lot more important. Although I guess we have a lot of other stuff to get to. I mean, there is a question as to how much does the ambassador actually matter?
It matters a lot more in Mexico than it does in Greece.
Yeah.
U.S.-Greek relations run themselves. But Mexico, that's a different issue.
Yeah. Mexico seems like it needs a competent person at the helm. Well, who's to say Carrie Lake won't prove us all wrong? I'd prove not to be a fucking
And Jared Kushner's dad's going to be ambassador to France.
Now that's a thank you position. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's too bad he can still be extradited for whatever crime he next decides to commit.
That's true. That's true. Well, let's start with Syria.
Yeah.
So Syria's fallen apart. Mm-hmm. And just as a quick recap, about 10 days ago, Turkey apparently gave the go-ahead for its proxy forces, which include members and former members of the Islamic State, also known as ISIS, also known as Daesh, al-Qaeda, and its offspring, the Nusra Front, and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and independent opposition groups, all of which I think can credibly be described as Takfiri groups, fundamentalist Sunni groups. Mm-hmm. They went through Aleppo quickly. They went through Homs quickly. They went through Hama quickly. A week ago Saturday, Bashar al-Assad and his family flew to Moscow. We said this on the last show. He was there overnight. He flew back to Damascus, but left his family in Moscow. He was in Damascus for one more week. Damascus fell in a matter of hours. He took off in a plane and was quickly granted asylum in Russia. That's not even what's newsworthy. right now. What's newsworthy is the fallout. So the prime minister of Syria flipped and switched sides to HTS. That's not an unusual event. He's a professional politician. He's not a member of the Assad family. He's a Sunni Muslim. The Assads are Alawi Shia Muslims. And so he just said, peaceful transfer of power. We're going to turn everything over to you. That's exactly what the rebels wanted to hear. Number one. But number two, and this is far worse, is the Israelis have just taken this to be the green light to invade and occupy Syrian territory in a demilitarized area along the Golan Heights. That was subject to a 1974 treaty, non-aggression treaty between Israel and Syria. They have bombed more than 350 Syrian military sites so far. When I last talked about this 3 days ago, it was 70 sites. It's now more than 350. And number three, and this is the thing that's the most interesting to me, I think everybody who's a serious follower of Middle East developments believes this was a major setback for Russia, for Iran, and for Hezbollah. And in the days immediately after the collapse, well, meaning since the weekend, really, generals in Iran were pointing the finger at each other, right? It was his fault that Syria fell. We wanted to go over there and fight, but that general said we couldn't. And then we heard, and I'm watching the Iranian press. I was watching this unfold as they're blaming each other. Then they said, no, it's the new commander of the Al-Quds force. It's his fault because he couldn't get his act together. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm curious. One, a setback for Russia, for Iran, but also like something of a calculated retreat. I mean, I think I would be curious your take on this. Yeah. That they cut him loose, right? There was no solution, and also potentially, a victory for American sanctions, because I have also heard the argument that ultimately, like, you just had a Syrian army that they were not getting paid.
Well, that's another part of the point.
Was a total pittance. They were not willing to fight, and you just couldn't win that war only with foreign fighters, ultimately.
Right.
And a victory for the IDF, who've been bombing the crap out of Syria relentlessly for weeks and months and years.
Yeah.
So they just degraded the state over time
until it became untenable. What you've heard about the Syrian military is true. The enlisted men were not being paid. The officers were stealing the money and not allowing the money to be dispersed among the enlisted men. And so why should they fight for free when it's a losing battle anyway? And they laid down their weapons and either went back home to their villages or fled to the Jordanian and Lebanese borders. Iran, though, getting back to Iran, as everybody's blaming everybody else, then this narrative appeared in the Iranian media that, no, Iran did have a coordinated military leadership, but they could not get approval from the Assad government to send troops because Assad was in hiding or on the run. That's probably not true, but it's one way of trying to explain to a very well-educated Iranian population that, well, listen, we tried our best. We can't force them to allow us to defend them. This, to me, is a bigger setback for Russia. And, I point to this kind of funny statement that came out of the Russian Defense Ministry day before yesterday, that the Russian government hopes that the Syrian rebels will respect the sanctity of Russian military bases. And HTS was like, yeah, fuck you, and we're going to take the bases. And so they've taken which bases they could take. They haven't taken the Navy base yet, but there are 3 separate Russian Army/Air Force bases that the rebels have taken. In the meantime, we should not allow ourselves to think that HTS controls the whole of Syria. It certainly doesn't.
No.
There's sort of a line down the middle of Syria where they've got most of the east and most of the west. The Turks still have a good chunk, maybe even a quarter of the country up north. The Kurds, which are opposed to Turkey, still have their slice along the border. And then the Americans have this area in the oil fields in the southeast along the border with Iraq. The country's a wreck. It's a failed state. It has no real leadership, at least no unified leadership. And there could be spillover into Lebanon, which I think if Lebanon's going to fall, it's going to fall quickly. And possibly even Iraq. The Iraqis convened a session of parliament just to talk about, like, oh shit, what do we do now? Because now, if ISIS or an ISIS, subgroup or an ISIS wannabe group decides, hey, maybe we weren't patient enough the first time, maybe we try this again, then the Iraqis also are going to have something to worry about.
When you say if Lebanon's going to fall, it's going to fall quickly, what do you mean?
I mean politically, because there's this
not becoming HTS.
No, not becoming HTS. No.
Does Lebanon have a prime minister right now? Did they not have one for years? I'm unaware as to whether they've put together a government or not. Okay.
Yeah. Lebanon is a very delicate balancing act, purposely so. It's a part of their constitution where the president has to be Christian, the prime minister has to be Sunni, and the speaker of parliament has to be Shia. Well, now there are no independent Shias. The only Shias are Hezbollah or Hezbollah-allied Shias. The Christians tend to ally themselves with the Israelis, of all people, just because they hate the Shias so much. And then you've got the Sunnis who just can't manage a country that has no resources. And so if it were to fall apart, when I say fall apart, I don't mean to fall under the spell of an HTS or HTS style group. I mean fall apart like it did at the start of the Lebanese Civil War.
You just mean that the state ceases to function.
Exactly.
Sort of like Afghanistan in the early 90s.
Absolutely.
Money's not
perfect
circulating.
Analogy.
Money's not circulating.
You might remember.
I mean, haven't we basically
Schools
been
can't open
almost at that point for a long time? I mean, a couple of years ago, we were talking about people getting
Yeah, but the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Americans have provided just enough money to make sure that the water treatment plant still works, that the electrical grid doesn't go dark, and that the phones are on.
Yeah.
And who's to say that that's going to continue?
It doesn't take long for things to start to fall apart. And when they go, there's a cascade effect for sure.
Ted, you might remember in the early 1990s, like 1991, 92, 93, Wall Street, there were Lebanese bankers on Wall Street that convinced underwriters to come up with something called the Lebanon bond. And they floated $1 billion worth of bonds to begin the reconstruction of Lebanon. And what they did with that first $1 billion is they completely redid the Corniche, right? That wonderful, beautiful hotel-lined waterfront walkway in Beirut, right? So if you rebuild the Corniche, that's going to encourage investors to come, and the banks are going to come back. Remember, Beirut used to be called the Paris of the Middle East, and it was the Middle East banking center. That banking center it moved on to Bahrain, and then kind of split between Bahrain and Dubai. Well, that first $1 billion went so well, they floated a second $1 billion in 93. And that just kind of poof, it went into people's pockets and just disappeared into the ether. And nobody ever put any money again in Lebanon because it's a failed state and it's a kleptocracy, klepto state, and it just wasn't worth it. Now here we are 30 years later, and people are saying, oh crap, we should have taken that more seriously. Now the place is falling apart, and what do? Do we leave? Do we go to Paris again?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I would.
Another foreign policy victory for the Biden administration.
Yeah.
Achieving,
and for Israel. boy, their new neighbors are sure going to be rambunctious.
Well, you're
Just
acting like
crazy.
there's daylight between the two, Ted.
Well, there is. They don't think there is, but there is. I mean, it's like just because you like the same Abrahamic God does not make you the same.
I mean, between the Biden administration and Israel, yeah. It's just ironic, like the nature of these victories, right? The Ukraine war, finally getting Assad from power. It's just so like, gruesome and sad, right?
Yeah, what's been accomplished? Nothing's been accomplished except chaos and more chaos. And the Egyptians are like, doggone it. Like, we didn't have enough problems. And the Jordanians are like, just make sure nobody crosses the border.
Well, we've got, we've wrested Russia's military bases in Syria from them.
Yes. Yeah,
which we did want to do.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Syria was Russia's only true military ally in the Middle East. The Russians are close to Iran, of course, but more economically than militarily. Syria was it for the Russians. There is no People's Democratic Republic of Yemen anymore. There is no Russian military presence in Libya anymore. It was only Syria, and now that's gone.
There's no Nasser anymore.
There's no Nasser anymore. Yeah.
What about the effect on? I mean, if I'm Zelensky in Ukraine, I'm not too psyched about this though, because I'm like, well, whatever assets were, particularly air power, were dedicated to supporting Assad in Syria, they're not coming to bomb my ass.
Yeah.
And if you're Zelensky, you were hoping that Russia would commit troops to Syria, because then you have that many more Russian soldiers that are not able to fight you in Ukraine.
Yep.
Yeah. Curious what Donald Trump's moves will be.
Oh, he'll solve it in a day.
U.S. personnel in Syria. Well, he hasn't. I don't think he's promised to solve Syria in a day.
Did you see his tweet about
Syria?
No,
what did he say?
All he said was, all caps, don't get involved.
Okay. All right. I like that.
I mean, he tried to withdraw personnel from Syria. That was one of the things. That was, I think, when you actually had like Pentagon personnel coming out and saying, oh, yeah, well, we have ways of making commands go slowly or something like.
Yes.
I remember during his first administration. The other thing, okay, I expect that there will be differences here, right? But we think about Syria, where Russia has an ally and where Russia had some bases, and we think about our great ally, Jordan. And, we think about all of the American justifications for involving themselves in the Syrian war and the protests that launched it. And, because the Assad regime was so terrible, like, 50 years of rule by this dictatorial family. It's awful. We must arm these people who are revolting. Would you say that there is a huge difference in terms, or like, pre 2011, that there was a huge difference in terms of the respect for human rights in Syria and in Jordan, the kingdom where we, have all our bases?
The Jordanians, this is all relative, so don't judge me by the first sentence that comes out of my mouth, but the Jordanians are better on human rights issues than the Syrians were. But with that said, that's not saying a whole lot. Mm-hmm. The CIA, as is now well known, used both Jordan and Syria and a half a dozen other Middle Eastern countries to send al-Qaeda suspects to undergo torture.
Mm-hmm. Black sites.
Yeah, black sites. Or not even black sites, just turning them over to the local intelligence service and saying, now remember, wink, wink, don't torture them. But whatever they happen to say in your custody, just write it up and send it over to us as a memo. Mm-hmm. Whatever happened to those people?
The Jordanians are a little frightening. So, on Y2K New Year's, I was staying at the Movenpick at Petra in Jordan.
Oh, cool.
And
I love it.
A few weeks later, maybe a few months later, if memory serves, I'm not really sure which it was, something called the Millennium Plot was exposed.
Yes.
And there was a plot to blow up 15 luxury hotels in Jordan on Y2K New Year's. I remember thinking, I had a wonderful time sitting with the ambassador and his wife from the UK to Jordan. Beautiful night of dancing. It could have all gone the worst possible way. And it was Jordanian intelligence that broke that up. They had infiltrated al-Qaeda, and obviously they used the hardest possible methods. And in a way, I might not be alive if not for that. But it also, you have to wonder, what exactly they do to get that information.
I will tell you from my own personal firsthand experience, the Jordanian intelligence service is one of the best intelligence services in the world. They should not be underestimated.
Yeah, I just think I didn't expect you to say, oh no, that they are equivalent. But it does seem to me like the difference between we should encourage our partners and be an example for them. We lead by example and give them some money. We should, the difference between that and we should arm people to overthrow this government sometimes is pretty small.
Yeah, that's right. I say all the time, and I use this as a hypothetical example. I happened to be the human rights officer in Bahrain for 2 years when I was there, and I would write the human rights report for submission to Congress every year. And I always say in my speeches, I would go to the Minister of the Interior to complain. This was the Prime Minister's son. Her son-in-law, rather. He was married to the Prime Minister's daughter. Nice guy, relatively senior royal family member. And I'd say, Your Highness, you cannot just pick up a 15-year-old boy off the street and beat him to death because he marched in a peaceful pro-democracy demonstration. Now I'm going to have to write this up, and I'm going to have to send it to Congress, and it's going to go in the human rights report. But then an hour later, the CIA station chief goes in and says, don't listen to the human rights guy. We'll give you $10 million, and we want you to open this secret facility where we can torture prisoners. Or better yet, you torture them for us, and you record it and send us the recordings or send us a transcript. Okay, who's he going to listen to? Is he going to listen to the human rights guy that's going in wagging his finger? Or is he going to take the 10 million on the QT and allow the CIA to do what it wants?
Yeah.
I guarantee you it's the latter.
Yeah. I guess before we move Syria, do you have any predictions? Like what's gonna happen? Is it like HTS is still branded a terrorist group by the United States? There have been these sort of efforts off and on to rebrand to allow al-Jilani, who's now he's come out with his
hard currency.
His full name, I forget what it actually is.
They can't run the country. They can't pay anyone.
Yeah. I mean, how far, I guess, is the rehabilitation of this group gonna go? I don't know. I don't necessarily have a prediction.
Oh, listen, I think territorially, they're not going to be a threat to anybody, at least not in the near term. The Israelis are going to continue bombing the daylights out of whatever they want to bomb. They're going to occupy Syrian territory. The Russians are moving on. They have bigger fish to fry right now. The Turks are going to celebrate this great victory. They're going to take their buffer zone along the border that they have for years sought. But I would not be surprised if the CIA, MI6, and probably a half a dozen other intelligence services begin to discreetly reach out to HTS and say, listen, there's got to be a way we can work together. We don't mean you any harm. If you don't mean us any harm, and maybe we can make this work. The U.S. national interests are to keep Syria as weak as possible, but to keep them contained within their borders. That would be a foreign policy victory.
So we just sort of ignore it the way we started ignoring Libya.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. Yes.
John, what about HTS keeping it together? I mean, I smell civil conflict. I mean, that's an alliance between. It's a hodgepodge of groups, right? I mean, they're going to turn against each other.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, with that wouldn't be the case if they had lots of resources to share. But they're going to be like rats in a cage with no food.
And the question then is who has the most weapons, right? And who gets ammunition? So far, it's whoever the Turks decide is going to be their proxy. There have long been reports that the CIA was arming one faction while DOD was arming another faction. We'll see if that continues. But yeah, Ted, you make a good point. I wouldn't be surprised to just see bedlam.
Sad.
Yeah.
Well, should we
And
talk
in all
about
this, I say, congratulations, Israel. You
Yeah.
guys are
did
going to have some hell to pay. I mean, yeah,
Yes.
they get a buffer zone out of this too, pretty much in perpetuity. But
Yes.
still,
Yes.
not worth it, really.
No.
Or should we talk about the shooter?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
torn
talk
over
about the
this.
shooter.
Unfortunately, seems to have been apprehended, and from near where I am, from apparently a very nice, well-to-do family in Baltimore. Well, nice, I don't know. Well-to-do, right? So maybe
Yeah.
nice is suspect.
Very wealthy.
Yeah, family in Baltimore. What are they saying about him, Ted?
Well, they say so. He's 26 years old. Luigi Mangione was the valedictorian of his pricey Baltimore all boys private school. Went to UPenn, graduated cum laude. By all accounts, was popular, good looking, well liked, and
I think
very
got
smart.
A bachelor's and a master's degree in 4 years.
Yeah.
And he was a bit of a dork. He liked video gaming, not at all uncommon. I went into his Twitter/X feed last night. He followed Joe Rogan. He followed AOC. He had a sort of hodgepodge of typical Gen Zoomer kind of, bro kind of interests. With a hodgepodge from the left. He liked RFK Jr. as much as he liked AOC. And he had great interest in the Unabomber Manifesto. He gave it a positive review on Goodreads. Apparently he had a book club that got some of the members got angry because they didn't say why they got angry, whether it was the politics or just because maybe the material was too dry. But whatever. So look, this is obviously a young man who was thoughtful, kind of a scholar athlete, right? Like a surfer, intelligent, searching. I mean, sounds like the kind of guy I would think was awesome. Very obviously intellectual and intelligent. About the only thing that's really the subject of speculation, aside from the fact that he shot a CEO in the middle of the street like a dog at 6:45 in the morning in Manhattan, that sort of takes you away from that picture, is the portrait of him suffering tremendous back pain. He had appears to have had very serious back problems, very serious surgery. There's really no evidence that he's ever personally or indirectly come into conflict with insurance companies, but a lot of people have been pointing out the fact that he's 26, which means he got kicked out of the Affordable Care Act, sort of parent plan as of 26, but it's not like his parents couldn't afford to pay out of pocket for anything he needed. It seems like whatever experiences he had navigating the health insurance system were unpleasant enough that he started to hate them and take a personal interest in that. But he was arrested in possession of a 200 or 300 word manifesto, handwritten, that has been leaked. There's a fake version, but there's also an apparently real version. And basically it's sort of like, it reads like,
it's very straightforward. Like
half of a Ted Rall syndicated op-ed about, how awful the health insurance and for-profit medical system is in the United States. And basically his mother reported him MIA back in November. Apparently he kind of went dark to a lot of his friends online about 6 months ago. I speculating only, I keep thinking, well, if you're planning a murder, maybe you don't have a lot of time for socializing. And so, he's trying to work himself up to that. There appears to have been a considerable amount of planning coupled with, some pretty big mistakes that led to his apprehension. And he is definitely the biggest folk hero murderer in my lifetime, for sure, hands down. I mean, Osama bin Laden's death was not greeted with as much glee, not nearly as much glee.
Not even by me personally, I will say. I remember when Osama bin Laden dies and just feeling like, ask not for whom the bell tolls, et cetera, like feels weird to celebrate a death. I think that was sort of pre-radicalized Michelle. The other thing that I think, I agree with everything that you've said, we've talked about this before, right? Like I have a lot of sympathy for this guy. I think it's probably too much to hope that he doesn't get the book thrown at him, but
he's going down.
To come short with, I would like to end up just short of publicly condoning cold-blooded murder. But, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for this guy, and I think that hating health insurance companies is totally rational. I think that in this, I think he is a really, by all appearances, a really, really smart young man in his mid-20s, which is when, if you're going to have some kind of mental break, it's going to happen. And I do wonder how much a role that might have played. And also, I had a conversation this morning with a friend about like, what's crazy exactly? You know what I mean? Like, what's the difference? We put every mental condition in this bucket that we call mental illness, which is everything from depression to psychosis and schizophrenia, right? We call all of that mental illness. And so, yeah, like I have been in pretty dark, perhaps I could have done pretty wild and crazy things, but for 150 micrograms of Wellbutrin or whatever, right? Like I would have, but I still would have been a rational person, right? Or felt I could have like handled myself, understood right from wrong, managed things in the day to day. I don't know. We were having a conversation, like if it does turn out that, who knows, they try and use some kind of insanity defense or they.
Those never work.
No, that's true. I'm not necessarily recommending it, but like, you know, the nature of the personality that you have to either be one of these bandits or be a sort of a revolutionary and make some kind of statement like this, right? Where do we draw the line?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the revolutionary aspect, right? I mean, this kind of reminds me of a micro version of the Weather Underground, right? Like Marxists always like to say that the Weather Underground committed the mistake of getting ahead of the masses. They thought, 500 well-educated, mostly white people could basically spark a revolution, and that they would set the example, and then that would cause the revolution that we all needed. And the thing is, as Lenin said, a revolutionist does not make revolution. A revolutionist recognizes when a revolution is occurring. And those are not the two same things. And the revolution has to come organically from the masses. I mean, obviously, organization can take place. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where if there was a dedicated national resistance organization trying to overthrow the US government or just change the entire capitalist system, and this guy was a foot soldier in something, let's say an IRA type guerrilla army, that he would someday have a statue for him and he would be a hero of the revolution. There's just no organization to do this. It's the fact that he's completely solo. He's rogue.
Yes,
he took
exactly.
it upon himself.
And that's
like
why you can
the Unabomber.
Have the exactly, right? And that's why you think, oh well, I don't know, there's some antisocial slightly over the line of what we call sanity. Whereas if you are doing this, or maybe as part he's of an organization heroic. With a plan, oh yeah, I mean seriously, this is the thought that I've been asking. My grandfather was in the French Resistance. He killed people in cold blood. He walked up behind German officers and shot them in the back when they came out of bars drunk. And then he stole their wallets to get their papers. Often, I still have some where the pictures of their family back home in Germany, right?
Wow.
He killed them. It broke him up. He was never the same after World War II. He lived at the bottom of a bottle until he died in the 80s. But he did testify against Klaus Barbie.
Wow.
That's cool.
But the point is, if you shoot an SS officer in World War II in occupied France, are you a lunatic? Are you a murderer? I mean, the German authorities did. They published. I have the propaganda. I have the poster, the wanted poster for my grandfather for terrorism. Now, like the thing is, and the murder of public officials in the exercise of their functions. But at the end of the war, Charles de Gaulle pinned a medal on his chest.
It is.
So what is it? Right?
It's the difference between
the difference murder an SS officer in World War II. I'd say no. It's not.
It's just, do you have an organization? I mean, the way people are treated is, do you have an organization behind you? Then you are a hero and a revolutionary. Are you acting alone? Win. Then you are, yeah.
You have to have the organization, and the organization has to prevail. Otherwise,
Good distinction.
Right. I mean, so that's sort of like, otherwise it's all over the place, like a Stefan Bandera type character, right?
That's right.
Tell you, this is something that NPR was saying this morning that I thought was really disgusting. There were some other investigations into why the US public has been so captivated and so supportive of this guy that were more worthwhile. But NPR in talking about the manifesto without acknowledging that you can read it online, was saying that extremism experts are poring over Mangione's online profiles and his writing. And they had one of their reporters sort of lecture us about that. She was saying the valorization of this guy is very troubling. And then she says, this made me really mad. She says, what really struck me, though, is that I've typically seen people who commit mass violence or political violence praised, even venerated as martyrs, in really dark corners of the extremist world. You know, within online communities that emulate mass shooters, for instance, or in violent white supremacist spaces. Seeing a much wider and mainstream public call this suspect a hero is troubling. And for extremist analysis I spoke to, this really speaks to how Americans have over time become more open-minded toward political violence. It is so dishonest to suggest that thinking the CEO of UnitedHealth had it coming comes from the same diseased wellspring that would lead people to lionize like Stephen Paddock, right? Or a school shooter or something. And I think it's really gross that they are conflating mass violence, mindless mass violence, someone taking revenge on a teacher or whatever, or shooting up a concert or shooting up a gay club or anything like that, and any kind of political violence at all, right? It really is like, it is sort of trying to disqualify the whole idea, right? Like if you feel a pang of sympathy or admiration in your heart for this guy, well, you must also like the Orlando the Pulse murder suspect or whatever. It was really, really disgusting. It really got under my skin.
Well, I mean, the thing is that I think what they're deliberately, willfully missing here is that if you are sick, and if that sickness is serious, but even if it's not, and there's nothing more maddening than, you do what you're supposed to do. You go to your doctor. The doctor says, Ted, go get, go to CVS, pick up these meds, come in next week, we'll do this surgery, and then you'll feel better. And then here I am, I'm in pain. I actually am in pain. I broke my wrist 2 weeks ago, and it hurts. And so that's already pretty annoying. You're already going through that. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to have to get on the phone with Fidelis and get a pre-authorization code. Right. And then, which, by the way, could be revoked the second you go in. And it literally feels like these companies are willing to let you die. And it's personal. So it's not like abstract, like, oh, I don't like the New York Yankees. This is a company that's trying to kill me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. I told you guys before we started recording today that that I'm torn on this issue for the very reasons that you said, and Michelle, for the reasons that you read to us from NPR. Listen, premeditated, lying in wait, first-degree murder, it's wrong. But obviously, I have this weird sympathy for this poor kid. I saw that X-ray like everybody else did with these horrible screws going into his spine. And like Michelle said, at that age, you're thinking about life, you're thinking about your place in life, and he believed he had been wronged, and maybe he wasn't as stable as he had been previously. And
well, maybe it wasn't even personal. I mean, by all accounts, the operation went well. He spoke favorably of it. Maybe he's just, what would you call it? Self-radicalized. Maybe he just woke up. Maybe he just has sympathy for other people who are suffering from the system.
And I think there is another component to this that I will say this Politico article that had a headline that made me laugh got into. Politico has another, everyone's trying to figure out, well, why are Americans so, approving of this guy? And Politico magazine has a headline that says, people are cheering on a shooting. This theory could explain why. And I kept thinking, like, you don't need a fucking theory. We just hate our health insurance system. But it did make the point that
by the way, I should also point out, sorry to interrupt, but Brian Thompson was a bad man.
Yeah.
I mean, he was under investigation for insider trading. He found out that his company was being investigated under antitrust violations. He dumped the stock, apparently, that he owned, and that triggered a sell-off that cost his own company $25 billion in market capitalization. He was a bad CEO from their point of view. We may find out that Luigi Mangione really was a hitman working for some angry stockholder. I mean, I'm joking, but you know. He was a bad man.
I mean, also just in general, right? Was a high executive at UnitedHealth during a period of time when it was, increasing its denial of care,
38%.
Taking on more U.S. market share. Yeah, the
biggest of in-network.
Yeah.
The rate for in-network denial should be 0.
And presiding over, the use of various innovative technologies to either diagnose people with illnesses that they don't have, so you can milk the government, or automatically deny people benefits. Yeah, a very bad man. Go straight to hell. But it was like, I think that actually maybe this article is correct in pointing out that there is a second component that contributes to this mass sort of lionization, or at least reluctance to really condemn Luigi Mangione. And it's not just like everyone hates their healthcare system or this healthcare system, but also that people really feel that they have no other recourse, right? That they cannot make the state respond to them. And they are right? You cannot make the state.
I've had this argument with my more centrist friends, and they're saying like, oh, well, you should work within the system. I mean, I'm like, okay. And I'm like, you point to me one thing that you can do that could have any effect at all. If anything, I mean, this situation's been getting worse, not better.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And both parties are completely owned. I mean, what are they talking about? I mean, it's fiction. There is no redress within the system.
You are told that there can only be in the United States 2 political parties. They are Republican and Democrat. If you dare entertain thinking about voting for or joining anything other than them, you're either a crypto Republican or you're just a hopeless crank and a troll, right? So you have to work through the system by pushing or voting for or volunteering with or whatever.
And let's just say you're a certain senator from Vermont who decides to work within the system, that's not allowed either.
You get kneecapped. Yeah. And I mean, on one hand, you have Republicans who think nothing is wrong with the American health care system except for Obamacare, right? Repeal Obamacare and they'll be fine. But, there was a story in Sludge noting that one of the top fundraisers for the House Democratic Caucus is a registered lobbyist for UnitedHealth Group and has been since 2006. So he's a major bundler for Democrats, for the House, for the Senate, and he also, for the last 8 years, has been making millions of dollars advocating for this insurance giant, right? So yeah, this other necessary prerequisite for us all to fall in love with the social bandit is feeling as though we cannot make our state respond to our grievances. And if we live in a democratic state, well, that shouldn't be the case. You know what I mean? And so it feels like all of these articles are dancing around the idea, because all of them, none of this writing, no one is defending the health insurance system in this country, right? I haven't seen any of that. They all acknowledge it.
Well, except
and then
for
there's
one
just sort
person,
of a like
the CEO of the parent company of United Healthcare, who is also a CEO. He issued a video to his employees that was leaked, in which he's like, this is all bullshit. We're awesome. We're doing a great job. We're providing a valuable service, making sure that everybody gets the care that they need.
Yeah.
Obviously,
no, it's
and
outrageous.
all the comments has been like, well, dude, you're next.
Yeah.
And they're worried
Fingers
about
crossed, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just sort of dancing around this idea that, yeah, okay, yeah, we all hate our healthcare system, and oh, yeah, we all feel powerless to change it. Well, what does that say about our country then? You know what I mean? And what does that say about any
It
action
ties
we
into the
undertake?
election results too, right? I mean, like, why did people vote for Trump? I mean, this is all about feeling impotent and unable to change the system. People are angry and they want to express their anger. I mean, there's even, sort of T-shirts that make Luigi Mangione look like a heartthrob. Where he's like from the shirt from his Facebook,
I will say,
where he's got no shirt on, and
he
is a
doesn't
good
need that
looking
much
dude.
help.
Yeah, he's a good looking dude.
He looks like a heartthrob already.
Well,
He's
we
okay.
should talk a little bit about that. I mean, I was worried about, before he was arrested, who is this guy going to be? Is he? They're going to try to obviously personalize him and make this about like his personal quirks, sort of the way that they did with the Unabomber, while ignoring the content of what the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski had to say, which was a lot of very powerful and important stuff.
Yeah.
And so in this case, they're going to have a little bit of a hard time, aren't they? Right? Great looking, privileged white kid, that a lot of girls would love to have hide out and, in their homes with them.
And you can't now, because they tried this before and it failed, they can't now say like, oh, he listens to Joe Rogan, so that means he's a bad person. You know what I mean? Like only Nazis listen to Joe Rogan or something. Yeah, he seems like a pretty smart and otherwise, kind of regular dude.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, following someone on Twitter doesn't mean that you agree with them. I follow Donald Trump. I just want to know what he has to say.
Yeah, I do too.
Follow so many freaks on Twitter.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, you have to see what they're. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Trey Gowdy. Yeah.
Trey Gowdy.
Also, just to sort of provide some context here, there was a good story in the Lever pointing out just how much health insurance have made since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. They have made more than $371 billion in profits since the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which was passed in 2010, but really fully went into effect in 2014. And more than 40% of that net income went to UnitedHealth.
Fuck the Affordable Care Act. We would be so much better off if it had never passed, because there would we'd have socialized healthcare now. We would have pushed for it. It would have been a pressing crisis. Guys, do you think there's any chance that President-elect Trump, who for all of his many other failings and shortcomings, is certainly able to read the room and has his finger on the pulse of public opinion? He hasn't had a thing to say about Luigi Mangione. Nothing at all. This is a guy who silence isn't really his
That's thing. A good point.
Is it possible that he's going to be like, I didn't really do anything about healthcare my first term, but if I did, I might really be beloved.
Well, remember repeal and replace?
Yeah. It didn't go. I mean, I feel like, the Affordable Care Act has turned into such a money-making machine for health insurers that, if he wants to try and get past that lobby, great. I don't have a lot of faith in what.
Well, he's not running for re-election.
I don't have a lot of faith in what would be, you know what I mean? I'm sure they would, I guess, maybe be empowered to just kick a bunch of people off insurance. Like, I don't know that I trust Donald Trump or his party to come up with something to replace it,
Yeah.
Nor do I.
And so then you just have a bunch of people kicked off insurance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Only Nixon could go to China. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, stranger things have happened. And I do think you're right. He does have kind of his finger on that pulse. And I do think like JD Vance as VP, I mean, JD Vance is a freak in a lot of ways, but might be supportive of something like this.
RFK Jr. certainly.
Definitely.
Maybe. I mean, write it down, Ted. Write it down and date it, and then we'll see.
I actually have this. Yeah, I'm going to pitch something to the Journal about how there's a whole list of things that leftists are hoping they can get out of Donald Trump that they never could have gotten out of a Democrat.
Yeah, the Journal had a very scathing editorial about this kid. Saying
Of course they did.
What a bad man he is.
They're the party organ of American capitalism. Yeah. I mean, they have to.
Yeah. Yes. They were pretty nasty about it. Yeah,
and I'm sure they were making fun of the fact, like, what an ingrate. He was given everything. He was privileged. Why would someone? He is a class traitor. No question about that.
Yeah. Bravo.
That's a badge of honor.
It is.
Exactly. I know. We love it. We love them. Yeah, I do think again, like, when it come back to the point that if
can he be convicted?
Well, if we were a functioning democracy, people wouldn't feel so impotent. And then,
can you find 12 people, though? Can you find 12 New Yorkers to
who
send
will
him
convict
to prison?
him?
I think you're going to have to go through a pretty long voir dire before you seat that jury.
Or offer up a charge of manslaughter.
Yeah.
He does whatever, 8.5 and then gets paroled.
God, he'll be only like 34 in that case.
They can't do that, though. I think, like, from a systemic, I don't normally think of things this way, but I think this is a high level thing that goes all the way up to the highest corridors of power, to the governor and beyond.
Well, but let me ask you this, Ted.
Happen.
You're a New Yorker. What about what happened to this Penny the other day? He was acquitted on all charges for strangling a mentally ill homeless man in the New York subway system. They charged him with, well, first they were going to charge him with murder. Then they charged him with manslaughter, and then they charged him with something, criminally negligent homicide, which is a misdemeanor.
And they couldn't even get that.
They couldn't even get that. They ended up dismissing the manslaughter charge, and he was acquitted of criminally negligent homicide. So they couldn't seat a decent jury for that. That was a cause célèbre for the right. Might this be a cause célèbre for the left?
Well, by all accounts, actually, I got to push back on that.
Okay.
The jury was absolutely the media felt that they were a very thoughtful jury, that they kept asking they asked the right questions, the right definitions. They kept coming back to review the evidence. They really took their time. They seemed to be like smart, thoughtful people, as far as we can tell. Look, the general feeling among both white people and people of color I've talked to seems to be basically it came down to, in public opinion and probably in the jury box, it came down to the 20 or so witnesses who were on the train with Daniel Penny, who testified, many of whom for the prosecution, but all said they were scared shitless of what they saw from Jordan Neely when he said, got on the train, he was ranting and raving, spittle flying everywhere, getting up into people's faces and saying, somebody's going to die. I don't care if I go back to prison. I don't care if I go back to Rikers. And I think basically, like individually, I think we all know what happened here, right? Basically, what started out as an effort to subdue this guy, he got locked into it mentally. Like, I think Daniel Penny, he just held on too long. Full transparency, I was mugged on the subway back in the mid 80s. I managed to overcome my assailant, who was bigger than me, and I got him on the ground, and I didn't stop kicking him, and I would never have stopped kicking him if the doors hadn't opened. And when the doors opened, by this point, my eye was split open. I'm on my hands and knees. I'm out, walking, crawling out, but I headed for those doors. Now, if I'm on that jury, I would have told that story to my fellow jurors and said, the train pulls into the station at Broadway Lafayette. He doesn't get out. He doesn't let go. Why? You're no longer trapped. There's other people paying attention. Why can't you be like, hey, someone help me with this guy?
Yeah.
Get rid of him.
Yeah.
Then run off the train, yank the emergency brake to call the police. Why? These are all experienced, I think, commuters, but I think in the end, it came down to this was an unusually terrifying guy acting in an unusually terrifying way. I think
I'm shocked that they didn't. It does seem like
that's a New Yorker,
very clear-cut case of criminally negligent homicide. Those
are New Yorkers.
Shocked. Yeah.
Those are New Yorkers refusing to play Alvin Bragg's game. They decided after they overcharged for second degree manslaughter. They decided, okay, now we're going to let him walk. We're not going to do this if you don't convict him of this, we'll convict him of that. No. And I don't think they liked it. And I think it just came down to really the way our system's supposed to work, reasonable doubt. I would have said there's reasonable doubt. Do I think, Daniel Penny is a good person? No, I think he's kind of a creep. I don't like the fact that he referred to Jordan Neely as a crackhead. I think, I don't like the fact that he's been all over Fox News, giving an interview with Jeanine Pirro. But, it's like he's Bernard Goetz. It's kind of like he's a right-wing asshole, but he's not a guilty under the law, right-wing asshole.
I'm surprised we're not seeing more comparisons with Bernie Goetz. I expected that right from the get-go. And there were a few mentions, but people are seeing this somehow as a different case.
It's very similar. I mean, although the difference is with Goetz, right? He was personally attacked by 4 young men. He was a white guy attacked by 4 electrical worker kind of guy, computer programmer. And so it was just about him. And again, among the people who saw it, when the police arrived at the 14th Street station on the Uptown 2 back in 1984, every passenger said he went that way, and they pointed the wrong way. That's right there, your jury verdict, right? I mean, it's kind of like, we were there, we saw it, we side with the white guy. And I think this is different in that Daniel Penny was arguing that he didn't personally feel that scared, but he was concerned for his fellow passengers, and he felt like he was being a good Samaritan, the way that Fox has characterized it.
What makes it it's sort of worse if you personally don't feel that scared. Like, you personally think that this guy is a nutcase and being difficult, but is not going to kill, he's maybe not actually going to kill anybody. He's not actually going to hurt anybody, but I'm going to put him in this headlock and kill him anyway.
By the way, a headlock, a chokehold that is no longer allowed by the NYPD.
That's right.
So hilariously, if he'd been a police officer, he could have been charged and found guilty for doing the same exact thing. Yeah. But apparently, if you're a freelance civilian, you're allowed to do it.
Yeah, he learned it in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's also a lot. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't on that train, right? Of course, it's a lot to do with like who's perceived as being more frightening. A ranting and raving insane white man or a ranting and raving insane black man. I mean, I think that also comes into it. I'm shocked that it does seem to me, I wasn't there and I wasn't in the jury. And I didn't, no, I know, but like if he's saying, oh, I didn't feel scared, but I thought I'd just choke this guy out to help everybody else out.
Well, he didn't say he wasn't scared at all, but I think he was trying to say this was more about, but in New York law, you're allowed to use deadly force to protect yourself or someone else if you believe that there's imminent danger. And it sounds like there was reasonable cause to believe there was imminent danger. I think what happened is this went on 6 minutes and it should have gone on 3, That's kind of my take.
Yeah, it just seemed like if you accidentally kill somebody, there are laws to govern what happens when somebody accidentally kills somebody, the guy, Neely passed out, and at that point, should have let him go,
Yeah.
Oh, well. Do you guys want to hear any of the goodies that are in the National Defense Authorization
I'm always interested in the NDAA. That's where everybody sticks their goodies in.
Okay. Listen, forgive me. I didn't read the entire 1,800 pages, but I did read the table of contents and then went through. It mentions, we'll get to the doozy in a minute. It does mention a strategy to resolve deficiencies across the F-35 joint program, which is just sort of funny to me. Good luck with that at this point. $100 million for HBUs and MSIs, which is interesting. I didn't know we were putting money for universities in the NDAA, but fine.
You can put anything your heart desires in the NDAA.
Well, yeah. The House Armed Services Committee Democrats issued a statement saying, giving their point of view on the joint bill that had been released. And they said that they were successful in blocking provisions that attacked DEI programs, the LGBTQ community, and women's access to public health care. They also blocked provisions that would have restricted support to Ukraine. or would have prohibited DoD from supporting Palestinian refugees, et cetera, et cetera. However, the final text does include a provision that would prohibit medical intervention that could result in sterilization for military dependents under 18 who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which means, I guess, you can't use your military health care for puberty blockers for a trans child if you are a military family. It has a little bit about, oh God, dystopian. There is language requiring a positive human interaction in decisions by the president to launch nuclear weapons. So this is about like trying to make sure we don't set up a situation where AI is launching nukes. Bad news for Taiwan. It authorizes a Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative modeled after the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which then I went to try and hunt down. And I can't quite tell when that started, but I'm thinking it's 2014. So congratulations, Taiwan. You're one step closer to following the path of Ukraine. We have, then getting down into the weeds of it, in this language, in making assessments of casualties and fatalities during hostilities, the Department of Defense may not cite as authoritative in public communications fatality figures that are derived by U.S. designated terrorist organizations, government entities controlled by U.S. designated terrorist organizations, or any sources that rely on figures provided by U.S. designated terrorist organizations. So this is about, we are not going to publicly cite the Gaza Ministry of Health's casualty numbers.
Well, I'm glad about that, because those Gaza numbers from the Hamas ministry are way too low.
They're low.
They're not
too
accurate.
low.
Exactly. So I think they're inadvertently completely right, and we should go with the Ralph Nader estimate, which is well over 200,000 people.
Yeah,
I'd say probably closer to 300,000, and it's kind of arithmetic, right? There were 2.3 million people living there at the beginning of the conflict, and you can kind of really only account for about 1.9 or so now. So unless those people are all like, in Bali doing yoga, I think we know where they are.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look forward to those new figures. It authorizes a new mishap designation called a major mishap incident for military mishap that results in not less than $500 million worth of damage and is of such complexity or sensitivity that would affect the national security of the United States. So that is funny. There's a little throwback in there that there's not going to be any funding for the Wuhan Institute of Virology or EcoHealth Alliance. Ted, it says no money authorized in this act can be expended to operate aircraft of the DoD to transport currency or other items of value to the Taliban.
Okay.
So I guess even if
they'll have to Venmo it.
Yeah, you can't fly cash on Pentagon planes to the Taliban if you decide that you are going to give them.
So I think that's an offshoot of the Obama administration's decision to allow the Iranians to have their money back for all the F-14s that we never delivered in 1979.
Yep, that is exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, it harkens back to those crazy stories during the Bush years of the C-130 planes carrying pallets of $100 bills, all shrink wrapped. By some accounts, over $20 billion in cash for Iraqi warlords. And apparently not one penny of that has ever been accounted for. But, when it's guarded by $23,000 a year GIs, that's not terribly surprising.
That's right.
Yeah, it just sort of feels like, we're not going to unfreeze your bank accounts. We're not going to allow you to sort of transfer this wirelessly. And, just in case anyone gets any ideas, we are sure as hell not going to put your frozen assets onto a C-130 and transfer them.
Out of curiosity, John, I want to know, both of you, I really want to hear your answer. So riddle me this, right? There's the Doha Accord. But Trump negotiates it, Biden follows through on it, carries it out, executes it in the spring and summer of 2021. We basically withdrew withdrew from Afghanistan. We weren't really defeated. We withdrew. We turned over the keys to the Taliban. We negotiated with them in Kabul. Like we're like, the Taliban are like, hey, you guys, are you sure you don't want us to come in to, keep order? Because things are getting a little crazy in Kabul. We don't want the whole city to burn down. So we gave them the country back, right? We're like, yes. Okay, guys, we're out, we're leaving. But we're mad at them, and we don't, and we don't negotiate, and we don't no diplomatic relations, and and fuck you, another thing. Like, what did they do? We gave them the country back that we, had been driving around in for 20 years. Yeah. What's the big deal? I don't understand the rationale of like these sanctions and why we're keeping their money. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
You can't beat us and thrive. That's not allowed.
I say all the time too, that it's not like the Taliban came down from the moon. They just floated down from the moon and took over. These are the husbands, the sons, the brothers of Afghans, right? We gave them an idea of what American style government looks like. They hated it. They chose the Taliban. Okay, God bless. Knock yourselves out. We shouldn't have any opinion on what happens in that country. We gave them a choice. They made the choice. Go with God.
And they're not mad they're not mad at us.
No,
they're not coming after us.
No, they're perfectly happy with their choices.
Yeah.
And today there was an angry piece in the Washington Post. People are complaining about the Taliban decision to not let women go to medical school. What do you care if Afghan women go to medical school? They can go to Pakistan and go to medical school. Besides, would you want to go to medical school in Afghanistan? Seriously?
Most American women can't afford to go to medical school.
That's right. So stop judging. Yep.
Yeah. All right, let me give you one last bit. This was maybe the funniest part of the NDA for me. It says, none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this act for the Department of Defense may be used to knowingly provide active and direct support to any film, television, or other entertainment project if the project has complied or is likely to comply with the demand from the government of China or whatever entity under the direction of China, blah, blah, to censor the content of the project in a material manner to advance the national interest of the People's Republic of China. This is a little perplexing to me, but it just seems like all that DoD money that goes to Hollywood to sort of work, we can work together and we'll help fund your thing, whatever, we'll consult on it. If you are going to allow it to be broadcast in China, maybe you can't take part in that program. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how specific this is going to be. And I don't know what the definition is going to be of to advance the material interests of China. But it does seem like it's so broad as so it could be like, if you are going to distribute your movie in China, then you can't work with us.
Well, or if you change the content to adhere to the requests of the Chinese. My mind immediately goes to, it's not a perfect analogy, but the film Hero, which is about the founding of the Chinese empire after the Warring States period, was a response by the mainland Chinese film industry, backed by the government, in order to respond to the success of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was a Taiwanese production. And so they were like, we can also do razzle dazzle, Matrix type special effects. Now, it's not hard when you watch Hero, which is, by the way, an excellent film, maybe not quite as good as Hidden Dragon, but it's good. It's very clear what the message here is, which is it's all about unity. The nation comes first, personal sacrifice, self-sublimation. I wonder, Hero was financed not by the Pentagon in any way, shape, or form, but by the PRC. But would something like that not pass muster? And I'm kind of like thinking, why not? It's a great movie.
Yeah. Agreed.
It just is like one more way to drive a wedge between, like build a wall between anything Chinese and anything American, which is, of course, ominous.
Well,
right?
We should talk about TikTok while we're at it. I mean, so yeah, I mean, so the court, so obviously Congress and has passed, and Biden signed a law requiring a sell-off of TikTok by its Chinese owners. And now a federal court has ruled in that is TikTok is appealing this through the courts. Federal court has now has agreed with the government that they have the right to do this. There's no evidence whatsoever that TikTok has ever been used for anything nefarious, unless you count just sort of empty statements that have appeared in the media, like, well, we know they are, but they could, but there's no evidence it's ever happened, that's ever been presented to the public. So this goes to the U.S. Supreme Court next. I have a feeling that that majority is going to agree with the government. I mean, do you agree with me that this is a scary precedent?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
oh, yes,
absolutely.
Not that I care about TikTok. I'm not on it, and I think it's insipid, but
no.
Legally.
Oh no, it's wild. It's terrible.
It is.
And it is an effort to, it's ridiculous and sinister to drag national security into everything. I think it does show the importance of social media entities for the U.S. government, right? Like, we want to have these inroads into them. We want to be able to exercise influence and power over them. God forbid anybody else. Okay, well then what's the point of that, right? Like, why is it okay in your hands and so terrible in somebody else's hands, even in theory? Like, it's very dark. It's very dark. It's an attempt, a lot of this you can see also indirectly even as an attempt to isolate Americans from the rest of the world.
It's a really good point.
From the example of the rest of the world, from the reality, that there are human beings in the rest of the world. There are different systems of government, that people are getting along just fine. I think it's really gross. We're too isolated already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also, to me, there's just something about like how the US government, which has been proven repeatedly by Edward Snowden and many other people to have had and maintain and pressure tech companies and phone companies to have a backdoor so that they can spy on literally every communication in the United States and many of them around the world. They do that. They have done that. That is a fact. And here you have a company that theoretically, if this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, well, then that would be a real problem. It reminds me of the run-up to the war against Iraq in 2003. Well, if Saddam Hussein still had WMDs, and those WMDs included nuclear weapons, and he made friends with al-Qaeda, who are his sworn enemies, and he gave, for some reason, he decided to Christmas gift over his nukes to al-Qaeda, then New York could go up in a mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of ifs,
Yeah. And it is sort of, it's to some degree, right? It is condemning this company for doing something. Well, as you just said, it's condemning this company for doing something ahead of time that it hasn't done. I was just listening.
Minority Report.
This is peripheral, probably, but I was just listening to another discussion of the, ever expanding use of sanctions as a weapon of influence and war by the United States. And a facet of it that I hadn't considered is that no sanctioned entity or person is ever, like, there's no rule of law happening here. Nobody's going through any court process by which they are found guilty of doing this or that or the other thing that they're getting sanctioned
for. Or that they can appeal.
Yeah, the punishment is just applied, often without evidence, certainly without any evidence that has ever been presented to the public or subject to any kind of court procedure. And it feels like it's not dissimilar, I guess, what is happening in this case with TikTok. And again, you keep eroding the rule of law. Don't be fucking surprised when people are applauding this kid for shooting Brian Thompson in the street.
Yeah, I love the fact that, by the way, Josh Shapiro, the senator from Pennsylvania, issued a statement about Luigi Mangione, and he says, violence is never the answer. Says the guy who signed a bomb that was going to be used against the people of Gaza. That violence doesn't solve anything. That's clearly not something you believe.
Yeah, that's not our official policy, actually.
Yeah, violence solves a lot of issues. It resolves a lot of issues. Yeah,
violence is all we use. Police violence is all we use to try to solve homelessness or drug addiction or anything else. Basically, violence is almost our only tool.
The state's trying to monopolize the violence. That's what this is about. They don't like anyone freelancing.
Yeah. All right. I think we've probably gone on long enough, guys.
Yep.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. Deprogramming is over for today. We'll be back again soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.